So to coincide with the launch and to celebrate it, we've organised this roundtable discussion to explore certain of the subject areas covered not only by Managing My Financial Journey, but by the trilogy of True Potential personal finance courses. So I'm delighted to welcome Andy Haldane, Chief Economist at Bank of England, Sue Lewis, Chair of the Consumer Panel, Sir Brian Pomeroy, who is a former non-executive member of the Board of the Financial Conduct Authority and also former Chairman of the Financial Inclusion Task Force. I also welcome Hugh Stickland, who's Chief Economist at Citizens Advice, Peter Bould, who's Head of Media and Public Relations at True Potential LLP, and my colleague Sharon, Professor of Personal Finance Capability at the True Potential Centre at the Open University Business School. So much for introductions. Let's start with a few questions. The first question is, why is the public understanding of finance important? And adding to that, do you think it's becoming more important today, in today's financial world? And in asking this question, I'd like to point to a statistic which popped up from a survey which we did at True Potential PUFin prior to the launch of the first of the personal finance courses, Managing My Money, which found that 70% of adults fail to answer successfully basic questions on personal finance education. So, Andy, what are your thoughts on that question?
Happy to have a crack, Martin. Well, in some ways, it's easy to answer that question today than it would have been 10 years ago. Yeah. Because the global financial crisis laid bare some of the problems associated with people taking on too much debt, more debt than they can manage, and some of the problems of people investing in assets about which they knew too little. The consequences of both of those was too much risk building up in the financial system, and ultimately its culmination as the global financial crisis, which in turn rippled back and tipped over the edge the wider economy. So in some ways, those issues of understanding debt, understanding assets, not assuming too much risk or risk you don't understand, have been made as clear as they could ever be made clear by the events of the last 10 years. And the key point there is that individual financial decisions added up can have a big macroeconomic impact. And that impact's still being felt almost 10 years on. We could not have had a better case study, if you like, of why a public understanding, or why in this case public misunderstanding, may have very damaging consequences for the financial system, for individuals, borrowers and investors, and ultimately for the wider economy.
Sue, what's your angle on this?
Yeah, I take a slightly more consumer-focused view of this, I think, which is to say that products have become much more complicated over the last 10, 15 years. There's a whole host of stuff out there, all doing pretty much the same thing. People can't rationally choose in a marketplace where there's 100,000 different products that might help them. So they got missold things quite a lot on an industrial scale in some cases. And some of these things were relatively straightforward products, but in a sense a lot of people were victim of a financial services industry that was full of greed and trying to make money out of them. And we ended up in exactly the same place, of course. And several books have been written about the cause of the financial crisis. But people did take on too much debt, but they were encouraged to do so. They're still being encouraged to do so because our economy is built on people spending money. It's built on consumer spending. So I blame the industry and not the consumer. Do people need a better understanding? Yes, they do. I mean, what has to happen is that consumer protection regulation needs to meet consumer understanding. I mean, there's a limit to what you can expect consumers to do to move the market. And finding that balance, I think, is really, really important.
Thank you. Brian?
Well, we're now decades past the point when financial services were a sort of luxury or something only for better off people. Everybody needs financial services, and indeed some financial services, and I'm thinking of basic banking and payment services, are close to utilities in their essentiality, frankly. If you're not connected to those, it's as disadvantageous as not being connected to gas, water and electricity, with the difference that with gas, water and electricity, whilst you may choose your supplier, you can't choose the product. One's electron is another electron. In this case, you choose the products as well as the supplier, and as Sue has said, there's a plethora of products, they're very complex, and people need to pick their way through them. I guess we'll come on perhaps to some of the remedies for that, the idea perhaps of generic products and so forth later on. But the point I wanted to make about what you're doing is it seems to be different from most of what we call financial capability education, because most financial capability education thinks about personal needs, products, pension savings. What you're doing, as I understand, is taking a step back and saying there's a much sort of broader landscape you should understand, the origins of the crisis, so to speak, and how it happened. And as you say, on a sort of broad scale, things like the damaging effect of debt. And I think that's really useful. But the question I have is how you get people to want to take it. Because I can see very easily, if I'm thinking about a pension, I'm a 25-year-old, I might then go for something which addresses my problem, right? Yeah. The question is, what's going to make me go for this as a consumer of the product?
Well, I can say immediately that it's part of a trilogy, and this basically is, if you look at managing my money and managing my investments, the two other courses, which comprise the trilogy with this one, that those are very much about toolkits, about understanding finance. This is more about the landscape and the history.
But it is new, and this is this is something which the financial capability industry, if you can call it that, hasn't really produced before. Am I right? This kind of this sort of recent history of financial services and the crises is something which is not generally available in this accessible form.
No, it isn't. Hugh? Your thoughts?
So, Citizens Advice see thousands of people each week who have problem debt, personal debt, and to air a few more statistics, there's something like 8 million people in the country who are in some form of problem debts. Around 40% of adults don't have anything more than £300 worth of savings that they can fall back on. So we see, I guess, the personal impacts of mismanaged finances, and there are a myriad of reasons why people are in problem debt. Sometimes it's job loss or bereavement. Sometimes, as Sue says, they've been missold products that they thought were beneficial for them. But the impacts of those debts are really profound. It's mental health problems. It can also be physical health problems. It's sleeplessness. It's family relation breakdown. And that's why having a better understanding of finances is really important. As Brian said, financial services are very much a utility in today's world. You cannot really get anywhere at all unless you have an income stream, unless you have somewhere that you can save your money, a transactional bank account, and somewhere where you can save for a pension as well. So these things are mainstream in the economy, but even more so they're mainstream to society as well. So ensuring that everybody has a really good understanding of where their money comes from, how they save it, how they spend it, how they invest it, where it goes at the end of the day, it's really, really important.